Okay, so you're lactose intolerant and you still want to eat dairy. So I'm going to be going over the worst things to eat and some of the better things to eat and how you can actually manage this and know what you're doing when you are lactose intolerant and getting the least amount of symptoms from being lactose intolerant. So for starters, you want to know, is this an allergy or is this an intolerance? So you can go ask your doctor for that, or dietitian, or whomever, and I'm not liable for anything that happens here for you following my advice. So for me, I am lactose intolerant. Everybody who is lactose intolerant has a certain amount of threshold in terms of the amount of lactose that they can handle before they get the bad symptoms from it. So the worst thing that you could possibly do is drink a cup of milk and eat nothing else with it on an empty stomach. That will flood your body with lactose and you will get the bad symptoms from that. So if you want to drink milk, you have to have lactose-free milk. There's no way around that one, okay? So dairy comes in various forms. You have your higher fat dairy like whipped cream and butter. Those have a very small amount of lactose in it. Check the amount of carbohydrates per serving on the back of those labels and you'll notice a tiny amount of carbohydrates equals tiny amount of lactose. You can have fermented forms of dairy like yogurt and cheeses. Some yogurts are certified lactose free and there are other yogurts that are not. Those other yogurts that are not, you can check the back of the label, see how many carbohydrates per serving, and chances are most, not all those carbohydrates are lactose. Okay, and the yogurt itself is fermented, so a lot of the lactose is broken down into simpler sugars. But they're not exactly saying that it's lactose free because they don't want to test it. So you can't get away with eating yogurts, especially if you're eating it with a meal. So anytime you're eating lactose, eat it with a meal, with protein, with fiber, with fat. That'll slow down the digestion of lactose and give you less symptoms. Another thing that you look at is cheeses. The fresher the cheese, the more lactose. So fresh mozzarella will have more lactose in it than a very old cheddar. The older the cheese, the less to zero amount of lactose that will be in it. So that's exactly how I get around still eating my dairy. I eat older cheeses instead of younger cheeses. When I am eating something with lactose in it, I make sure I have other things within the meal. I don't just drink milk on its own on an empty stomach. That would just be dumb. Okay? And whipped cream and butter and things like that shouldn't be giving you much symptoms, if any at all, if this is a lactose intolerance. Okay, another thing is, obviously, would be the lactase pills. And in my experience, they don't work very well. And when you do want them to work, you have to have a lot of them before the meal, during the meal, after the meal, and they're really gross and chalky and dry tasting, and they just lead to a very unenjoyable meal, and they're also very expensive, so I wouldn't recommend them at all. Okay, and we all have different levels of intolerances, as I mentioned earlier. So some people will be more intolerant than others, and you just have to know what that threshold of intolerance is and not to exceed it. Okay, so you can have a little bit of ice cream, but don't eat a huge amount of ice cream. So you just use your common sense here, and you'll know how to manage this properly. Okay, it's not that complicated, and you know, if you are at Starbucks and ask for a lactose-free drink with some whipped cream on top, they may make some comments, but the reality is there is a very little amount of lactose in that whipped cream.